8,500 years ago.
Okay. Well, let's get on to some of the more recent stuff, however, as we go.
Here's some of the other Hannah tools, end scrapers. Yes, the upper levels at the Crown site were much more recent. There seemed to have been quite a gap in the occupation from the Hannah occupation of 3,300 to 400 years ago. Suddenly, it's not until about 1,000 to 1,800 years ago that somebody appeared at the site again. And these appear to have been people who left materials which have been assigned to the laurel culture. And here we see some laurel pottery on the screen.
This is also the first evidence of pottery making in this area, as I recall.
Yes. Now, laurel is in Saskatchewan is only found is restricted to northern Saskatchewan. It doesn't occur in southern Saskatchewan. But at about this same time period, pottery appears in southern Saskatchewan as well, or a bit earlier.
What is the time period we're speaking of right now?
The laurel time period in Saskatchewan is fairly late. It's somewhat later than elsewhere, but it appears to start about 1,200 years ago through to about 1,000 years ago, in that ballpark.
I see. Okay.
The laurel projectile points, arrowheads, by this time it looks like they're arrowheads. The bow and arrow appears to have been introduced. And these are thin, little, side-notched arrowheads. Some of them are triangular, and these are probably finished points, and they were just used as triangular arrowheads.
Yeah, you can see there certainly has been quite a change in the shape of them.
That's right, quite dramatic. Another laurel site in the area is called the Peterson Creek site. And this, again, is at the mouth of a creek into the Saskatchewan River. These weren't the only areas where sites occurred, but they were areas that people came back to repeatedly. So we would get stratification at the mouths of the creeks. We'd get a buildup of occupation.
Which in some ways is good for archaeologists.
Yes, that's right. Here we have the excavations at the Peterson Creek site. This was, again, a fairly deep occupation. And here, however, we had several layers of laurel occupation. We had 3 or 4 layers and something earlier before it. And we're not quite sure what that something is yet.
Yeah. Ubiquitous unnamed complex. Yeah.
Close-up of some of the excavations here, and you get the little flakes from making tools. You get what we call fire-cracked rock. People in those days heated their water very often by heating up rocks until they were red hot and then dropping them into the water and heating the water. So you get these fire-altered, fire-cracked rocks as a ubiquitous part of the camp debris, as well as the bones, the cast-off parts of meals. Here's some very typical laurel pottery. This is the rim sherd from a laurel pot. And this is of what we call the boss and punctate type. You can see that the bosses are the little lumps that come out to us in that line, and the punctates are the portion that go in, that go away.
Looks to be a fairly simple decoration on the
yes,
pottery.
That's right. But some laurel is decorated with a much more complex decoration, although we didn't find that in the Nipawin area. But farther north in Saskatchewan and east in Manitoba, you do get it.
Okay.
At the same time that the laurel people were in the area, there was another group of people who left archaeological materials which we call Avonlea. And here at the Wallington Flat site, in the distance, you see the tripods, the screening tripods of a crew working at an Avonlea.
They're almost
occupation.
lost in it, aren't they?
That's right. You just realize how vast the area is, and here we're trying at our little sites to learn something about thousands of years of occupation.
Now, Avonlea people we usually think of as being on the plains, the southern plains of Saskatchewan. Do the Avonlea sites in the north part look the same as, do they have the same sorts of artifacts as those in the south?
That's right. The Avonlea people, it appears that their culture developed on the grasslands, and they had pottery as well, like the Laurel people. And actually, the materials that they brought into the Nipawin area, their arrowheads, they're very distinctive, fine little arrowheads, are almost exactly as the same as those from the grasslands.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, their pottery is the same as well.
Yeah, I think you've got some photographs here of them. Take a quick look at them. And the
here is some Avonlea pottery. It has a row of punctates. It doesn't show up too well on these particular sherds. Avonlea pottery is generally net impressed, very fine net on the exterior. And that's characteristic of Avonlea pottery in the parklands to the south, and some of the grasslands pottery, Avonlea pottery as well. Here, I think in these slides you can get some idea of the net impressing.
Mm-hmm.
Here are these fine little Avonlea arrowheads.
Very delicate.
Very delicate, considering that certainly on the grasslands these were being used to dispatch very big bison.
It's an incredible thought. Yeah. Okay, now the late prehistoric period. Can we take a look at what sites you
Okay, some of the very largest sites that we worked on date to the last few centuries, just prior to the arrival of Europeans on the scene in central Saskatchewan. And a couple of the very large sites were on what we call Bushfields Flat in the turn in the river here. We're looking down on Bushfields Flat here. And the Bushfield West site was the major one of these. And the occupation here was just a few inches underneath the cultivation zone. In fact, in some places, cultivation had caught it. And we used a grader to take some of the cultivation zone off.
Yeah, as I recall, you're working with a pretty huge site here, so that would...
That's right. And this excavation that we did at Bushfield West horizontally was probably one of the biggest that's ever been completed in Saskatchewan, something over 600 square meters excavated at this particular site over 3 seasons. Just masses of camp debris at this particular occupation. Now we're looking at, this was probably occupied AD 1450 through to AD 1650 in that time
very
period.
late in
very,
time.
very late.
Yeah.
In fact, in the 3rd season, we actually did find a very small fragment of iron, about that big, and a very small fragment of sheet copper or brass, about that big. So these people were getting just the first trickle of European trade goods coming into the region.
You know, it sounds like quite an interesting time period. I think it's probably one we'll have to do a whole program on all by itself, since it is such a complex site. Just to quickly wrap up this then, what have you learned in 30 seconds or 25 words or less, as they say? What have you learned about the archaeology of the Nipawin area?
We have certainly learned a fair amount about the ebb and flow of occupation in the area with environmental change. We have, however, learned that even though the environment changed, people tended to live in the same places, which was a surprise to us. It appears there is an element of tradition involved, in that the major site in the area was Nipawin, which is quite close to the dam site on the valley top, and it's where the town of Nipawin gets its name from, but it was known historically to the Crees as Nipawin. And the occupation there is amazing. It extends for about a mile along the valley rim. And it begins 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, and it continues through to the historic period. The continuity in the area is wonderful, and the fur trade post was located in the same area. So this is the interesting thing about the Nipawin area, is the continuity of occupation from the prehistoric period in the same exactly the same places right through into the historic period when the Europeans were there.
Yeah, it does sound very interesting. So, thank you very much, David, for coming and talking to us about the work that you've been doing there. As I said, I think we'll have to get you back for another program or two.
Very welcome, Margaret.
Okay. My guest tonight has been Dr. David Meyer from the Saskatchewan Research Council in Saskatoon. He's been talking with us about the research that they have been doing in the Nipawin Dam area in northeastern Saskatchewan. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I hope you join us again for our next program.